Welcome back. Welcome back. This is the People's Voice. I am Trey Evans, and I am the People's Voice. Thank you again for checking out the podcast this week. As always, it is greatly appreciated. As always, we thank everyone who has taken some time to listen to the podcast today. We do understand that you could be utilizing your time to do something else, so we are truly appreciative that you're taking that time to spend with us. As always, if this information is valuable, you find it to be enlightening and worth sharing, we ask that you subscribe to the podcast and turn on notifications. That way you'll be notified when each episode is released. We put out a new episode each and every Friday, which is heard on all podcast platforms. And then you can also check out the video that we post on YouTube, which comes out every Wednesday as well. In addition, for those of you, especially those of you who are listening through Apple Podcast, if you could, just review the podcast. You know, you good or bad. You know, and I'm not, trying to provoke you in any direction, but just rate it. If you enjoy it and you've been getting some good information from it, 5 stars is great. That's a great start. You want to do 4, okay, but in all seriousness, it really helps to market the podcast because people see that, hey, people are listening and they're rating it, and then other people start to joining as well. So if you could, just an ask for myself, go ahead and rate the podcast. I'd appreciate it. And also in other podcast platforms as well. But I know a lot of people listen to Apple podcast platform. But as always, we say thank you and welcome to the People's Voice podcast. So today, I want to get into the topic of food trucks. I want to talk about food trucks today. And I want to kind of hit this from 2 different sides, okay? I want to talk about food trucks because if you're like me and, your eyes are open and you're out and about, food trucks are very popular in terms of providing food to individuals and communities. I want to talk about this today from 2 sides. Number one, I've noticed going through some of the data on the podcast, a lot of the audience, not a lot of the audience, well, yeah, a good share of the audience are business owners or business people or aspiring entrepreneurs. And so I think that this conversation will be good for those who appreciate business and also are looking for a business opportunity. Excuse me. In addition, I also want to talk about some of the safety concerns about food trucks and some things that you should look out for when you as a consumer are utilizing food trucks for lunch, dinner, or whatever meals that you eat at. So that's what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about food trucks. And like I said, I'm talking about this because I've noticed, at least in my world, that food trucks are more and more popping up in locations that they typically didn't pop up in, at least as I remember. Most times I used to see food trucks in like downtown centers, right? So if downtown, whatever city, LA, Chicago, New York, DC, I would see them, outside the buildings, right? Because people would come out for lunch and sometimes I would also see them at construction sites. But in any event, I'm starting to see them more now in like parking lots and gas stations. So I said, I'm going to talk about this today because there's clearly been an increase in the amount of food trucks in terms of where their locations have changed as well. So, I'll cover that today. But to start out, I kind of wanted to talk about how do you what's required to have a food truck? Let me start there because I think I'll go into that first, and then I'll talk about the safety concerns and some things to check out before you eat from a food truck. But um, I did some research, and I first stopped at the site, which is called the Restaurant HQ, and on their site, they provide a lot of information about restaurants or forms of restaurants. But on their site, they kind of broke out a report, or they kind of did a report where they talked about food trucks from a business standpoint. They kind of reviewed just the cost of them, the popularity of them, just an overview of the statistics. So I think I'll start there first. One of the first points that they noted um, in their research, in their report, is that food trucks, in terms of their growth, because like I said, I know I've noticed more. I'm sure you've noticed more, but it says food truck, based on an analysis that was done, I'm assuming by them. They say that food trucks have or will continue to have about a 10.9% annual growth rate. Um, Now there was a decline back in 23, about a half a percentage point, but in overall, food trucks have continued to increase in terms of the number. Um, One of the things that they point out here is that currently there are over 58,000 food trucks in the United States, and that's an increase of 15% since 2018. So right now, 58,000 food trucks across the country is, it may seem like a small number, but that's a lot of businesses, if you think about that, or a lot of food trucks. On average, in terms of revenue, they say that food trucks in 2024 um, are expected to gross over $346,000 in revenue. Now, obviously, for those who own restaurants, they might think, well, that's a small number, but obviously you're dealing with a much smaller operation. But 346,000, and this is gross numbers, that's not bad at all. Um, if you're thinking as an entrepreneur or something that you want to do, if you have a passion for cooking, things of that nature. I won't go through all the statistics, but one of uh, I guess the two more that I want to highlight is that in terms of profit margin, it says here that food trucks see about a 6.2% profit margin, which in terms of the restaurant industry is pretty high, because typically restaurants see between a 1 and 3% profit margin. So that's pretty good as well. Here's the thing that kind of blew me away. It said nationally, food truck owners make half of their total profit per year. So, depending obviously on the size and location of the food truck, and obviously what food is being served, um, food truck owners can profit between 24,000 and 150,000 and $153,000 annually. Now that's that's a pretty good clip. I believe the national medium household medium, or a single medium wage is like somewhere between 60,000, something like that, 60 to maybe 80,000. Don't quote me on that, but the fact that you can make over $153,000 profit from a food truck, that's not a bad business at all. Um, and those are just some of the stats that they talk about. I'll come back to some of the pitfalls, if you will, of food trucks in terms of how long they last and things of that nature. But I kind of wanted to start out from there. So increasing in terms of popularity, increasing in terms of the number of operators, can be very profitable. Obviously, location and food and operation plays a huge part into that. Now, from the consumer standpoint, because I want to make sure I highlight this as well, are food trucks safe, right? Because you have these mobile vehicles that are preparing these foods um, you know, in very small, usually smaller conditions. Um, how safe are they? So I went through a couple of articles here. One of the first articles that I went to was a article that was done by the Delish, which is a magazine called Delish, and looks like they cover food preparation and different dinner ideas and things of that nature. But on their site, in this article, looks like it was from last year, but they kind of highlighted some of the concerns that you, as a person that is eating from food trucks, should look out for. One of the things that they talk about is just the operation of the food trucks, right? Because a lot of these food trucks, they have to basically operate in some tough conditions. So whether it's hot outside or it's cold outside, these food trucks have to operate in those places. Now, keep in mind, a lot of these food trucks again are smaller in size. So now you have many people cramped up in these food trucks, depending on how many workers. And I think I read somewhere that typically most food trucks have about 1.2 workers. So somewhere between one and two, one and a half, two people working. Obviously, you can't have half a person, but typically somewhere around 1 to 2 people are in these food trucks. Depending on the size, you could have up to 3. But one of the challenges in terms of food trucks, in terms of the challenges that come with that could lead to you know some challenges with the food that you are receiving, is their cramped conditions, and also the fact that they have to operate in many different conditions. It says here food trucks need the same facilities to prepare and store food as a restaurant. When you cram all these facilities into a tight space, cross contamination is more likely to occur. And I'll kind of talk about cross contamination here in a second. It goes on to say that in terms of the employees, they end up um, doing more than one job. So you might have, you might have the same person that's cooking the food, is washing the dishes, is also, taking the orders. And that can lead to cross contamination because someone is handling money and now they are touching your taco with the same hand that they took the money from, or they swiped the credit card from or debit card from the person. That can lead to cross contamination. So, in terms of food trucks themselves, as consumers, we definitely have to keep an eye out and be smart about that. Matter of fact, let me play this clip from what is this from? This is from NBC 10 in Arkansas. And they did a story this past summer where there was a food truck that actually created um, some food poisoning, or some cases of food poisoning were a result of this food truck. So let me play this story real quick, and then I'll kind of go back into some of the things that you should look out for as a consumer when it comes to food trucks. This is from NBC 10, Arkansas.
That started to happen about 2 weeks ago. Daniel Johnston was one of the folks who got sick.
Unfortunately, that day I ate here. I got my food and went back to work and ate it. Immediately afterwards, I began to throw up out of both ends.
For Johnston, it was a bad chicken dish that made him sick, and others have complained of bad shrimp as well. The outbreak resulted in dozens of people taking to Facebook to warn others of the tainted food.
And it was surprised me how much it impacted this whole community. When I go to restaurants, I expect them to handle their food correctly.
And that was from Arkansas this past summer. But as you heard in the story, the food from that food truck not only affected that gentleman in the in the story, but multiple people were affected by it, and ultimately the food truck ended up being closed down. It says temporarily. I don't know if it's been reopened, but because they were cited for violations in terms of preparation of food and things of that nature. Um, in terms of what you should look for as a consumer, as someone who utilizes food trucks, and then I'll talk about the food trucks themselves in terms of operation and how long they last, and then I'll close out from there. In terms of food truck safety, some things that you should look out for. I'm reading an article here from the Huff Post. They did a great article last year where they talked about the 7 things that you should look out for. Number one, they say that you want to check to make sure that the truck has a clean exterior and service area, and this is important because um, if the outside of the truck is clean, chances are the inside will also reflect the exterior. Not saying that's always the case, but they say that this is a good sign in terms of whether or not this truck is following protocols in terms of food safety and things of that nature. You want to make sure that the food truck clearly displays its certificates from the Department of Health. A lot of cities, most cities will require that they pass and that they, obtain a certificate of health, and health inspectors will come out and do their checks. So you want to make sure that the food truck is displaying that. You want to make sure that workers are wearing protective gear. As I was talking about earlier about cross contamination, and I talked about this in an podcast episode earlier this year about foods that can make you sick and food safety and cross contamination, things of that nature. I'll post that in this video as well. But you want to make sure that the workers are wearing protective gear. Now, a lot of cities require, and it should be common practice, that if a worker is handling food and then is also responsible for collecting money, they are responsible to basically change gloves, right? Take the gloves off that they were handling the food with, and then move over and collect the money and then put on a new set of gloves. So you want to make sure that the workers that you are approaching are wearing the trucks that you are approaching are where the workers are wearing protective gear, aprons, gloves, sometimes hair nets, depending on what type of food is being served. You also want to make sure that there's a hand washing station. One of the big challenges with these food trucks is in terms of having stations where they can have fresh water on the truck. Because again, you're dealing with very cramped spaces, and a lot of times those spaces are dedicated just to the needs of preparing and serving the food. So you want to make sure that these trucks have hand washing stations, or at least that you can visibly see them, depending on the truck. You also want to make sure that the truck has a functioning generator. Obviously, these foods have to be at certain temperatures, and if they're not properly able to store these foods in fridges, in refrigerators, or don't have proper cooking surfaces, that could lead to food poisoning as well, or cross contamination, and you can get sick. If a food truck has sanitizer available to guests, that's a good sign as well. And then last but not least, it says here, always willing to communicate with customers about food safety measures and what they've done. So if you ask them, hey, how do you handle your truck? How do you, what are your safety practices? They'll be able to either give you that information, or they'll be able to tell you, how they cook their food, the temperatures that they store the food at, things of that nature. So just a few things that you want to look out for when you, as a consumer, are going to eat from a food truck. Last but not least, in terms of food trucks themselves, now going back to that report from Restaurant HQ, food truck operators, and this is just for those who are interested in becoming food truck operators. Keep this in mind: 40% of food trucks, or I should say, 60% of food trucks fail within the first 3 years. Just keep that in mind. So only 40% of food trucks remain in business after 3 years. So it is a tough business. I know, sometimes we look at stuff from a distance and like, I can do that. I'm just giving you this information, not to discourage you, but to inform you so you know what you're getting into for those of you who want to get into this business. Also, it says that in terms of the cost, in terms of getting a food truck, it says the average cost for a new food truck and kitchen, obviously, is between 125,000 to 200,000. So, for a aspiring entrepreneur, it might be it might be expensive if you don't have the capital or don't have the funding resources. It is obviously much lower than starting a restaurant, so it's good. It's a good entry point if you have a passion to become a restaurateur. If you have the interest in becoming a restaurant owner, this is a good entry point to kind of practice that before you move on to something much larger or greater. It goes on to say startup inventory can cost anywhere between $2,000 and $3,000. You have insurance costs, which are $2,500 to $4,500. You have food truck parking costs, and then obviously you have just the operating cost of having a truck, which has risen between 2023 and 2024. The average cost has risen by 7.8%, which is in line with a lot of the rise in prices of food and other materials that we've seen over the past year. But I will post this information obviously in the video when I post it on YouTube. But again, I wanted to kind of give everyone this information today about food trucks. So I kind of wanted to do both sides. I was thinking about doing a part 1 and a part 2, but I was like, you know what, I'll just mesh it together. So hopefully this information has been enlightening, and that you are more informed about the food truck industry. And if you choose to become a food truck operator, or if you choose to eat at a food truck, you now have some information. And that's what this podcast is about, providing information to the people. But as always, if you want to leave a comment, you can reach me on any social media platform. I am Trey Evans on all social media platforms. And then you can also reach us at the People's Voice Podcast on Instagram. That's my time for today. As always, dreams are not just for sleeping. Please wake up and live your dreams. My name is Trey Evans, the People's Voice. Tell somebody about the dream. Salute.